rough patch, right? The last month or so, from the ripping apart of the community there in Buffalo to, you know, the horrible idea of a little girl hiding under the body of another little girl. And we've struggled with sadness, and we've struggled with grief. And I think we've also struggled with the feeling of trauma. I think we now live in a country where there's sort of like an alumni of people who've survived mass shootings, or people who've survived just the daily, 100 plus that are killed each day. But I think there's another feeling that I think makes it harder for us to be consoled, and a feeling that is not named as often as just the grief and the trauma. And it's a feeling that I've been aware of, and I've been aware of kind of around you all, and it's a feeling of being betrayed, that I think in many ways we feel like we've been betrayed by our country, betrayed by our government, at least a part of it. That certainly one of the basic things a country is supposed to do is to keep its people safe, to keep its children safe. And we now live in a country where gun violence is the leading cause of death for children. And yet, because the gun lobby has completely bought one political party, we have a country where guns are regulated. Guns are not regulated, but toy guns are regulated. And where every manufacturer is held responsible for their product except gun manufacturers. And what some people don't even know is the CDC has been prevented since 1996 from even studying the causes and the impacts of violence of gun violence in this country. And so it's hard not to feel kind of a deep sense. I certainly feel betrayed by the senators in Missouri and the governor, and by their devotion to power over caring for children. But it's not just really about the violence. I think in the last generation or so, there's been kind of a breach in the social contract that has really fed into that feeling of betrayal. Another clear example is just the growing inequity between the top and the bottom, which wasn't the case when I was a kid. A CEO might make 10 times, maybe 20 times, maybe 50 times what the CEO made, not 1,000 times. And David Gellis, who's one of the finance writers from the New York Times, has just written a book, The Man Who Broke Capitalism. Very interesting piece in which he kind of traces this huge change in our country to 1981, when a man named Jack Welch became the CEO of GE. In the 50s and 60s, if you read the annual reports of GE, they brag about how they cared for their workers, and how they paid them, and how they shared profits, and how they invested in their community, and even how much taxes they paid. And then in 1981, when Jack Welch became the CEO of GE, his goal became maximizing shareholder profit, absolutely, and he set a goal of reducing the workforce 10% every year. That was a goal, to reduce the workforce 10% every year through layoffs and plant closings and offshore stuff. And companies followed that. And so today we have a workforce that's less well paid and less well protected. And surely no one was surprised when the report was released a month ago showing that essential workers were 5 times more likely to die during COVID than people who had the privilege of working at home. And what did they get for their loyalty? If you look at how they were rewarded by corporate America, take Lowe's, which is the giant big box hardware store. They had some good years during COVID, and last year they were able to increase their CEO's pay to $18 million. At the same time, they reduced the median pay by 8% to just over $22,000. And then they took their $13 billion, this is by the Institute for Policy Studies, this isn't just me. They took their $13 billion in profits, and they used that to buy back stock for shareholder profits, so wealthy people became wealthier. They could have taken that $13 billion and given a pay raise to their 325,000 employees of $40,000 a year. I mean, think about $40,000 a year for a household making 22 grand, right? Even if they'd given them 10 grand, right? Or 5 grand, I mean, the difference that would have made. And so this feeling of betrayal, right? I mean, this feeling that this is no longer a country that's really kind of investing in all of us equally. And to think about, in Tops Friendly Market, I just thought, I can't imagine being black in this country, that you can't even be protected from some white power madman, right? And tragically, though, that feeling of betrayal has also been stoked by those on the right and fed into the white power movement. And Kathleen Belew, who I've quoted before, teaches history at the University of Chicago. She comes out and speaks every time there's a white power movement, every time insurrection. She writes about how the Vietnam War and the trauma and disillusionment of that really kind of fed into the modern white power movement. And she talks about things we all know, how disillusioning and traumatizing the war was for vets more than anyone, and how people returned from the war. First of all, they went, unlike the Second World War, where there was a clear moral aim, defeating Hitler, and the enemy was clear, wearing uniforms. Here was this, why did we send these 18, 19, 20, or keep sending them 58,000? What was the aim? And it was more guerrilla warfare, so the soldiers weren't sure, they were in villages. Was that a hand grenade or a bowl of rice that a little kid or a grandparent was holding? And they came home and to a war where a country where the war was so unpopular, and they felt very betrayed by how they were received. And her point is that a minuscule number, not a great many, but a minuscule number of Vietnam vets came back with their betrayal, which they all felt, and that betrayal was exploited, and they used it to create, to fuel the white power movement. Like Louis Beam, who's kind of one of the more well-known from Texas. He was a machine gunner for 18 months in a helicopter, came back, started paramilitary camps in Texas, joined the Klan, began targeting and terrorizing everyone from the Vietnamese fishermen who'd been resettled there at Galveston all the way up and down. And she's clear that, of course, it's a very small number, but because of their expertise and their power, they were able to make some really big inroads. And you see that betrayal being passed down to Timothy McVeigh and Dylan Roof and others. And of course, there's always been another way. We have a good handful of Vietnam-era vets at our church, and to a T, depending on what they saw and how deep the wounds were, they all came back, every one of them, determined to create a world here, a country that was more just, more peaceful, that was less likely to go to war, right? And that's what we hear in our passage this morning. The Apostle Paul, reminds us that the world has never been a picnic, right? He's writing, he's establishing a church in the middle of the Roman Empire. This is not an empire that cares about its people, right? There's very few people, making a lot, everybody's supporting it. It's a culture of violence. And Paul is very clear in his writings how tough he's had it, right? He's been shipwrecked 3 times, and he's been, in danger from robbers, and danger at sea, and danger in the wilderness, and danger here, and danger there, and he's been lashed and stoned and beaten, and he's been hungry and cold and in prison, and then he's also got the worry for all of his churches, right? But then in the middle of that, he always tells his afflictions, reminding us that he's surrounded by grace. And that's why we all show up, right? Because there's this sense, we look out of the world, and what are we reminded about? That all of this beauty, the grace, the creation, hearing a song, touching a lover, the cold drink of water after a run, it all comes to us as a gift, right? You couldn't have created this. Somehow, this earth is this beautiful gift that's been offered to you. And Paul reminds us that this spirit God plants in us makes it possible for us to take everything we've received and push it out into good. And so Paul tells us he wants to boast, he says, of his afflictions, because afflictions produce endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and we can boast in that hope. No matter what, we won't be put to shame. And of course, Paul is not the only one who talks movingly about this hope. Every year, every time we get this really dark times, Howard Zinn, the kind of social people's history of the U.S., kind of very left progressive historian who died 10 years ago, his passage about hope comes back out. He was in World War II, and he saw the suffering there, and he came back very determined to create a world of more justice and peace. And his words about hope, this is going to be my all-time favorite quote, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It's based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion and sacrifice and courage and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. if we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and the possibility of sending this world in a different direction. There are so many. I mean, I could preach for 6 more hours about all the places people are behaving magnificently. Not a month ago, we had the KC tenants having their New Awakening rally. I mean, they're going to get 10,000, tenants all lined up, and this is young people in this country. And if you got a group of people who have a feeling to feel kind of ripped off, well, it's a tough time to be young, right? Because some basic things like education and housing and having a child and just having a life, pretty hard to reach, right? But these people are coming together and they're creating a movement. And it wasn't just young people, some of us old folks were there too. And they're not just out there speaking, they're also dancing. They got the Center High School Choir, they got the Congolese band. And what are they doing? They're imagining a different world, a world of hope. And then at the opposite end, we got the people who've been in the struggle a long time, like the Jackson Brown clan. You know, we were at the concert Tuesday night, and I saw some of our older members there too. You know, it's kind of your Vietnam era crowd. And there he is, Jackson Brown, singing for almost 60 years now about this world, about calling the world to be a different kind of place. He's been, you know, you look at the 18 million records he's sold, but you looked at his activism. You know, he's been out there on every single thing, from nuclear to civil rights to gay rights to, I mean, it just goes on and on. He keeps singing. But no one, for me, shows us more magnificently what it means to look and to live in this world of hope than somebody who really knows a lot about betrayal, Hamdi Ukalaya. Now, that's not exactly a name that rolls off your tongue, but he was born in the mountains of Turkey, Kurdish. Kurdish people, they belong to the largest group in the world who have no state. So he was in a semi-nomadic family. They raised sheep and goats and cows. And then in the winter, they would come down to the village and they would make cheese and they would make yogurt. And he, as a Kurdish young kid, started sort of speaking out a little too much, getting in trouble with the government there. So his dad sent him to upstate New York in 1994. And he went to school a little bit, and then he started working in a factory, and then his dad said, the cheese here is terrible, you should make your own feta cheese. So he started trying to make some feta cheese, and that was like so hard, and he was about to go broke. And then one day in 2005, he drove by this empty Kraft factory plant. Kraft was one of the companies that followed GE and shut all the plants down, and this was a yogurt factory, and it had a big sign for sale on it. And he called his business advisor and he said they wouldn't be selling it if you could make money. But he got a small business loan, and for $700,000, he spent 2 years trying to figure out how to make this delicious Greek yogurt. When he came into the business, Greek yogurt was 0.5% in this country. Today it's 50%. And from the very beginning, our little Chobani guy did it differently. He followed what he called the anti-CEO playbook. He started off paying his workers twice the minimum wage. He made sure people had health care, 6 weeks of parental leave for same-sex couples too. Now that the Roe decision's coming, he's seen that there's reproductive health care, including travel costs for women. And he's also always employed refugees from the very beginning. There was a big refugee community in Utica, New York. And so he said, you know, that's a group of people we should be employing. So he brought them in, he got them training, he's got, translators, he's got transportation, he's got something like 19 different languages spoken. And he started doing profit sharing, and then he opened another one in Twin Falls, Idaho, with the same refugee population, which earned him what? Being targeted by Steve Bannon and Donald Trump before the election. Before they came for the Capitol, they came for Hamdi. Before they came for the Capitol, they came for a lot of Muslims, and Hamdi was one of them. And you know what he did? He didn't stop. He kept sharing his stock and doing this and doing that. And when that company goes public in the next year, it's not just Hamdi who's going to be wealthy, it's his 2,200 employees. And depending on how long they've been there, but their stock options, they're going to each be worth at least $200,000 more, up to $2 million. That's real money, folks. That's wealth, right? That's changing the future for 2,200 households instead of one person. Really, the people making the yogurt are going to become wealthy. And you know why he did it? He did it because he grew up in the mountains in a little village. He knew what it was like to suffer an attack, because when a wolf came for your sheep and wiped the whole bunch out, every single family would then give you one sheep. So by the very next morning, you would have your whole herd back. That's the kind of world, that's the kind of country he's helping us build. And so he named his yogurt Chobani, which means shepherd, right? Because that's the kind of world we want to live into, right? Every single day. I mean, just by something as simple as what you buy, you can say what kind of a world you want to live in, right? So may the inspiration of so many people behaving so magnificently remind us, right, that affliction produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And with that hope, we can begin to move this world along. Amen.